Hello everyone, I'm Alicia Walton and today I'm going to talk to you about paragraphs, thesis statements, and building your paper around a thesis. Right now you are looking at the Cengage-Wadsworth Handbook handout that I have posted to Blackboard for us to look at this week for our weekly readings. I know this book isn't assigned for this course, but I've scanned in a couple of chapters just to help you out with some current issues that are going on regarding paper writing and etc. that we've noticed with the text and action paper. Also, I think these sections on thesis statement and building your paper around a thesis could be very helpful for you to look at before you wrap up your paper on the research argument assignment. So let's go ahead and start out here. Paragraphs are building blocks of your papers. Now, a paragraph is literally just a group of related sentences. But each of these building blocks that these sentences form are used and should be used to introduce a major idea, a time shift, or to reinforce the importance of an idea in your paper. Knowing when to begin a new paragraph can be a bit tricky. Here's a checklist that could be very helpful to you if that's something that you've gotten feedback on, or if it's something that you know that you have difficulty with. It's good to run through this checklist before you turn in your paper. So look at your paragraphs. Make sure that you begin a new paragraph whenever you move from one major point to another. Make sure that you begin a new paragraph whenever you move from one time period or location to another. So an example, if you begin a paragraph and you're writing it, but then you go to move on to another point, like we are talking about time here, notice it's a separate paragraph even within this listing. That's because there are two different concepts about paragraphs, and if you push these together in one paragraph with one little checkbox, it's going to be confusing. It's going to look like they're related when they're not. Also, just as this says in the second checkbox area, if you move from one time period to another or one location to another, for instance, if you are telling a story that uses a timeline and you're moving from the 1800s to the 1900s, chances are the most logical way to write that would be to start out in the 1800s and build your way down to the 1900s. Or if you decide to flip that around, that's fine too. But you would go from 1900 and you would go backwards because that's the most logical order. You would use new paragraphs, obviously, if you are in 1898 in one paragraph and 1900 in the next. Why? Because the reader needs that break, that shift. When someone reads a paper or a magazine article or a blog online, you're looking at it and you're taking in the information. If you put too much information in one space, it's difficult for the human mind to take it all in. And that's part of why we break sentences up into paragraphs. But using these rules within this checklist also gives us rhyme and reason for doing it too. So, one point to another, one time period or location to another. So for instance, if I'm writing a blog about my vacation last summer, if I went to New York and then I went to LA, I'm going to transition to a separate paragraph when I leave New York and go on to LA. Begin a new paragraph whenever you introduce a new step in a process. So if I'm writing a list of instructions for how to make the perfect margarita, which would be non-alcoholic, of course, because this is a UC course that we're teaching here. That non-alcoholic margarita is put together with a list of steps, right? Everything really does have steps to it, and everything has a process. I would make sure that I had each step or piece of the process in its own paragraph so as to not confuse them. You also want to make sure you begin a new paragraph when you want to emphasize an important idea, something new that's coming up. Begin a new paragraph every time a new person speaks. That would be pertaining to an interview, or maybe even it could pertain to research that you use. I know personally I've written papers in which I'll have multiple quotes from different authors in one paragraph, and sometimes it's difficult to balance. Also, if you're writing fiction, that could be another time too to separate that out. Also, begin a new paragraph to signal the end of your introduction and the beginning of your conclusion. Apparently we don't get to have another page there. Let's see. Here we are. So a paragraph is unified when it develops a single main idea. The topic sentence states the main idea of the paragraph, and the other sentences in the paragraph support that idea. So really the topic sentence is the linchpin when it comes to unifying that idea that is presented within the paragraph. I know you've all heard of topic sentences before, and so this is just a little bit of a reminder. A topic sentence tells the reader what to expect, and then lets you begin introducing whatever that material is. That way, your reader's prepared and they can understand immediately what's going to be happening. So we have a good example here. And this page also talks about how occasionally you can have a topic sentence at the end of a paragraph. I really don't recommend doing that, not for this class. If you're working with fiction, sure, experiment with that. But in this course, put topic sentences at the beginning of your paragraphs. And chances are, if you make sure you focus on having the topic sentence at the beginning of a couple of paragraphs, it'll start to just become a habit after a while, and you won't have to focus on it so much. So here's a good example. The topic sentence at the beginning of this paragraph, again, tells the readers what to expect, and it's highlighted. I was a listening child, careful to hear the very different sounds of Spanish and English. Obviously, without even looking at the rest of this, you know what you're going to be hearing about, at least to a degree, right? You know that you're going to be hearing about a discussion on the experience of growing up listening to Spanish and English. And again, if you want to look a little bit more into the topic sentence at the end of a paragraph, you can. Again, I advise not using this so much for this class as much as maybe using it for fiction or becoming a bit more creative later down the road with some of your other college work. If you look at page 59, you'll also see some ideas for being able to test whether or not the main idea is stated as the topic sentence. I'll let you go through that. There's a revision there as well. But in summary, you really do want to make sure that your paragraphs are not only coherent, but that they're well organized and that you have those topic sentences at the very beginning. Make sure that your paragraphs are broken up within your paper. One of the common issues we saw coming back from the text and action paper was that there were lots of blocks of text, and each page that you write should have, and this is just a rule of thumb, 2 to 3 paragraphs per page, sometimes more. You don't really want more than 5, but you should have 2 to 3 paragraphs per page. And if you're looking through your work and you don't notice that you have 2 to 3 paragraphs per page in your paper, then you need to go through and break it up a bit and make sure that your ideas are broken up a bit better throughout. If you have gotten feedback from one of us saying that this is an issue you're having, always do that before you turn in your paper. Save you some grief. And again, going through here, if you look at page 60, there are different ways to arrange paragraphs, spatially, chronologically, or logically. We talked a little bit about that just a minute ago. Again, you can dive further in that on your own. I don't want to go too far into this. Also, be sure to use transition words and phrases. I don't think too many of you have difficulty with that, but do make sure that if you go through and you break up your paragraphs a bit, that you also make sure that you're transitioning them as well. Let's move on and talk about thesis statements. So your thesis or thesis statement, we typically use those interchangeably. They're basically the same thing. And your thesis is the main idea of your essay. Now, when you start working on your paper, it's a good idea, everyone has their own process, but it's a good idea to come up with a bare bones thesis to work from. And then you can build from there. Remember that when you first start working on your paper, your thesis is tentative or in rough draft shape. You will likely revise it and continue to work on your paper as you move forward. And that's okay. After all, you have to start somewhere. And it's impossible to wait to formulate a perfect thesis statement before you begin writing your paper. And if you try to do that, it can put you in an impossible situation. When I was a freshman in college, I used to wait and try to write the perfect thesis before I would begin my paper. And I would just end up in these huge jams where, and not a jam in a good way, but I would end up in this mess of not having enough time to write my paper because I was trying to write the perfect thesis. And I'd come up with it and have like a page written, and then, my paper was due 2 days from then. And it had taken me weeks to come up with my thesis. I didn't know I could have a thesis that was tentative, or a rough draft thesis, or a working thesis. So use a working thesis. You can update it. You can change it. Now, chances are you don't want to change it dramatically, but you can if you have to. So, what is, say, I've told you it's the main idea of your essay, I've told you that you can use a rough draft one, but really, what is a thesis? So right now I'm going to do the same thing that I do in class, but with you right now in this recording. So we're going to use a lot of hypotheticals here. So let's pretend I'm writing the argumentative essay, except I can write it about anything. It doesn't have to be about, I don't have the same parameters you do. Now, you still have the same parameters, by the way. I'm just hypothetical here. But I have to write an argument. So my argument is going to be, for the sake of this, and so I can show you what it looks like when you write a thesis statement, my argument is going to be I have to start out by making a claim, right? So what's my claim? I believe there should be a Starbucks on every corner of the UC campus. That's my claim. So I start out, let's go ahead and get rid of this. That's my claim, right? I believe there should be a Starbucks on every corner of the UC campus. If you're going to write anything argumentative or an argument, by the way, don't think of argument in a negative way. Don't think of it like you're having a fight with your significant other or your parents, or like sometimes the rough scuffles I get in with my dog Archer, the Yorkie, who wants to steal my pillow and I want my pillow, but he wins because he's cute. You know, that kind of thing. It's not really much of a fight. He always wins. But anyway, and I'm not much of a fighter for the pillow. Anyway, so, you know, don't think of it like that. Think of it like you're fighting for something, like an idea. It's a positive thing. And you have to start out with a claim that you're passionate about. Personally, I'm passionate about coffee. And I like Starbucks when they get my coffee order right. Which isn't always easy because I like have a complicated order. But anyway, so I believe there should be a Starbucks on every corner of the UC campus. That's my claim. Now, how am I going to turn this into a research argument thesis? Well, I'm going to copy and paste it because I'm lazy. First things first, a research paper should always be, and most of your papers in college are going to always be in third person. So the first thing we have to do, I'll make these bold so we can separate them out a little bit. That's informal, right? This is going to be formal and in third person. What does third person mean? It means he, she, they. So I'm going to take that I out. How do I do that? I take that I out right there, literally. I take out believe. So I make a statement. There should be a Starbucks on every corner of the UC campus. Let's try to be a little bit more specific here. Most people may not know what UC means. They may try to get it confused with University of California, even though I think there's this like CU or something. I don't know. It's not CU, is it? Who knows? I would Google it if I had more time. Anyway, so I would say the university, because I'm trying to be formal, right? University, can I spell university? Of Cincinnati campus. There should be a Starbucks on every corner of the University of Cincinnati campus. Okay, that's a little bit better, isn't it? But we could be more specific, because aren't there different places? Aren't there different locations for the University of Cincinnati campus? There's Blue Ash, there's downtown, there's other ones I can't think of right now. So let's say downtown. There should be a Starbucks on every corner of the University of Cincinnati downtown campus. Let's see if I can move this over a little bit more for you. There. Alright. Now, that's good. That's a formal claim. I've taken out the I. I've filled in what UC is. I've been more specific and said downtown. I could even say there, if I wanted to, right? Most people know what Starbucks is, but if I wanted to be more detailed, I could do that. And it's not too wordy, it's not too much, it's good. Now, how do I turn this into a thesis statement that actually functions well? Well, I also need to have 3 supporting pieces of evidence to back this up too, don't I? Now, this is where I could create it. There should be a Starbucks coffee shop on every corner of the University of Cincinnati downtown campus because students require coffee to complete their studies. Coffee is good for your immune system. Totally made up, by the way. I don't believe that's real. I wish it were. And wait, I need 3, and I still can't spell there, and that's okay. And complete their studies. Why do students require coffee to complete their studies? Maybe they need caffeine. Ha! Let's be more specific there. Never hurts to be more specific. See? I took out one word, put one word in. And that's usually the name of the game because you don't want this thing to be too long. And let's pretend that's something real too. Actually, I think there should be a Starbucks coffee shop on every corner of the University of Cincinnati downtown campus because students require caffeine to complete their studies. Coffee is good for your immune system and because coffee is uplifting. Now, this one doesn't seem so, if we look at the order of these, which one of these seem like the best reason? I think coffee is good for your immune system. It actually seems pretty good. So, still learning how to type over here. Just excuse me for a minute. There we go. Because, and let's say studies show if that was a real thing. And again, it needs to be a real thing. Actually, here's a good thing. It reduces your chances of cancer. Aha. And that is actually a real thing. Like allegedly. I can't back that up with a study right now. Just believe me for a minute. So, there should be a Starbucks coffee shop on every corner of the University of Cincinnati downtown campus because studies show coffee reduces your risk of getting cancer. Students require caffeine to complete their studies, and because coffee is uplifting. Now that coffee is uplifting thing is kind of weak. And so is this one over here. Students require caffeine to complete their studies. Really? I mean, do they? Where did I get that information from? We could say, I put here because studies show. Now, here's FYI. You can't just put studies show just because you want to. You need to find some studies that show this, and they need to be good studies. So we could have students require caffeine to complete their studies. How about instead of making such a bizarre claim or something that I might not be able to back up, I say caffeine can help students complete their studies. And because coffee is uplifting. Now, of course, I'm going to have to find a way to prove these things, right? And that's what I'm going to do as I move down. But I've just taken you through the process of what it looks like to write a thesis statement, and what it looks like when I write a thesis statement anyway. This is a thesis statement. This functions. It's a claim, an argumentative claim that I'm passionate about. It has an argument in it, right? There should be a Starbucks coffee shop on every corner of the University of Cincinnati downtown campus. And I have 3 reasons to support it up. To support it, excuse me. So this is what you need to do to create a strong thesis or thesis statement. And again, it's not easy to come up with the perfect thesis statement. So I might start out with this, and then I might find out that the one study I can find that helps me support this statement right here on studies being completed by students, I can't really find anything solid to support it. So I'll have to come up with another reason, right? And then I do some more research and I find out, well, hey, coffee is actually relaxing too. So, and it can be stress relieving. And then that could be something that I decide to replace that with. And then, of course, if I change this, I'm going to have to change whatever my entire paper is down here that mentions that. So that section, right? But there you go. There's my thesis statement. And that's how you go through the process of writing one. One more thing I'd like to add before I move on to how to use a thesis to shape your material is that you should make sure that whatever you're writing, you always take your audience's needs into account while you're writing it. So for instance, when I was writing this right here, how am I taking my audience's needs into account? Well, somebody else outside of our course or university may not know what I mean by UC. Someone from Thailand, although I think they do, but someone from another part of the world might not know what Starbucks is. Or, and I've had this happen before, sometimes there are multiple companies in the world with the same name. And you'll mention it thinking, oh, well, you know, Starbucks. And they're like, oh yeah, that place where you get the really cool throwing stars? And you're like, no, not that place. I go to a Starbucks where I get coffee. Yeah, and, you know, throwing stars are awesome, but not really as awesome when you're looking for your, pumpkin spice latte. Anyway, another way we take into account our audience is making sure that you be specific when you state which part of the university campus we're talking about. So, University of Cincinnati is big. Someone at Thomas More might wonder, well, which part of the University of Cincinnati campus are you talking about? We answer it by saying the downtown campus. For all we know, there is already a Starbucks coffee shop on every corner of the Blue Ash campus. And if there is, I am totally jealous. Okay, so moving on. Chapter 5, using a thesis to shape your material. This one's pretty easy. So we talked about how to use paragraphs to build your paper out. We talked about how to build a thesis by starting out with a claim, then evolving it a bit, building it out, and adding your 3 supporting ideas to it. And, oh, by the way, one more thing, thesis statement. Your thesis statement should typically be 1 to 2 lines long. Notice that this is one sentence. It's one long sentence, but it's one sentence. It could be 2 if you wanted it to be, but it shouldn't be more than 2. If your thesis statement is more than 2 sentences, you need to go back and rewrite it. Anyway, let's go back. So, how do we build our entire paper off of that thesis statement? This is how. Go through and read Chapter 5 that I've included on our weekly readings. This is a really great thing to keep around if you ever have difficulty organizing your paragraphs. It's simple. Have your introduction. You can have a hook or something entertaining that pulls the reader in, and then your thesis statement in your introduction paragraph. That's all that really is. And then have your body paragraph. And really, once you mention those three pieces of supporting evidence, you should be mentioning them in order down here. And you should mention them in the order that you line them up in your thesis statement. So I decided this was the best order. I tried to kind of lift them. I read uplifting, my apologies. I tried to list them in the order of what I thought was the most important. And so I'm going to talk first about coffee reducing your risk of getting cancer. Then I'm going to talk about how caffeine can help students complete their study. Finally, I'll mention how coffee is uplifting. And if I change any of these out, because this is a tentative thesis, right? If I change any of these out, I will also just change the paragraphs I've written below them and make sure it's all still in order. Now, you don't just have to have one paragraph for one supporting idea. You can have as many paragraphs for that as you need to. Look at how many pages you're required to write. And one of the things I used to do I struggled with making my papers balanced sometimes when I was first writing in college. And so I would actually go through and figure out what my 3 supporting pieces of evidence were. I'd write at least my first paragraph for each one, have my introduction, make up kind of a dummy conclusion or a tentative conclusion, and then I'd figure out how many paragraphs I needed to finish up my paper and kind of count back and figure out, okay, well, I need, let's say I need 10 paragraphs. I would divide them up by 3 and maybe be uneven. And I'd say, okay, well, let's go ahead and make them 12. I'll go a little bit over. Going a little bit over and having your paper be a little bit long is better than having your paper be short. So set it up that way. So this first paragraph, point 1, and then continued. Point 2, then continued. Point 3, then continued. When I say point, I mean supporting point. And then your concluding paragraph. Your conclusion can be 2 paragraphs long, if you need it to be. At least have it as 1. Sometimes you can have a paragraph right here wrapping everything up a bit and doing some restating, and then you can use that final paragraph to talk about future studies. So this gives more advice about how to create that thesis statement. You can look through that. Highly advise you do. And in the meantime, this is also a great example for how the author used a thesis statement and their 3 pieces of supporting evidence and pulled them down here. And again, notice they are in order. Actually, she uses 4. You could do that. Well, you could do that. I'm telling you to stick with 3. You're going to have your hands full with the 3, trust me. Also, this mentions Wikipedia being a valuable tool. It is a valuable tool. You can look at what the Wikipedia authors use in their research and their works cited at the bottom of the page and go look at those as sources and potentially find some good sources there. I don't advise using Wikipedia itself as a source. It's not a usable source for this course at the very least. And in most of your courses it's not going to be. But you should always check with your professors. There's also a checklist here as well that you can use. And this is good for reviewing your entire essay, looking for your paragraphs to make sure they're wrapping up nicely, and checking your words before you turn in that final draft. Alright, next up you're going to have a quiz that you're going to be taking. This quiz this week is incredibly simple. It is only 5 questions long. There's a mix of true, false, and multiple choice, and you're allowed to take it multiple times. So good luck with that.